Welcome back to the end of the year video series I've been putting together. Like every video, I'll have it in the cards. This is where I'm going from my December 2019 reads all the way up to December 2020. So nothing I'm reading in December can be on these lists, which hurts me because I just finished a book that's like really good. But you'll hear about it soon and it can be on next year's list. And today we're gonna go over my top 10 audiobook experiences. So I am putting series together. If I did binge a whole series, I'm not picking out favorite books, and it's less about the narrative, although that does help where it goes on the list. It's more about my audiobook experience with the work, because there are definitely books on here that maybe weren't my favorite books of the year, or maybe they were rereads and things like that, but the audiobook experience was just such a unique new experience for me, because this was the year of audiobook experiences for me. I still don't read that many audiobooks. It's like 1 or 2 a month. My audio retention is not amazing, and I love podcasts, and also with the pandemic happening, I have not been going into work as often, and that's when I would do a lot of my auditory stuff, when I'm walking to the shuttle or when I'm doing stuff around the lab. So when I'm just at home, I'd rather physically read because that's what I prefer. But I did enjoy a lot of the audiobooks I got to this year, and I will try and mention all the narrators that were important because obviously they are the people who brought these stories to life for me, and let's get into it. At number 10, we have the entire First Law trilogy. These are narrated by Stephen Pacey. I read these back in college, so like 5 to 6 years ago, in case you don't have any sense of how far away I am from college. But I thought they were fine. I thought they were okay. The lack of plot for me was hard because it's very character driven, and although the character work is amazing, I didn't love any of them that much. I mean, I do think some of them are funny and have hysterical moments and are really great satire on the fantasy genre, but I wasn't getting this whole investment thing and then the intrigue of the world. I have a lot of mixed issues with the First Law world, but his narration of these characters really added that extra something to make me care about them, and I thoroughly enjoyed my reread of this entire trilogy because of his narration. So if you're like me and you've been having issues finding focus or investment while physically reading the trilogy, I highly recommend trying out the audiobooks because I think he does a phenomenal job. And since it is so character focused, I don't think you miss out as much on a lot of the world building as you would in some other fantasy books for audiobooks, because I know for me and other people who read fantasy, sometimes it's hard to jump into a fantasy audiobook because there's a lot of new names of places and things, and for me, without the visual cues of the new words, it's hard for me to retain that, and I don't think that's as big of an issue with the First Law book because it's more character focused. I could be wrong because, like I said, this was a reread, albeit like a 5-year in the past reread, but I really enjoyed it, so I highly recommend consuming it that way. Number 9 is the Binti novella trilogy. This was narrated by Robin Miles. And again, this is one of those things where I was having trouble connecting with the character of Binti when I read the first novella. And then picking up Binti Home and Binti the Night Masquerade with Robin Miles as the narrator completely changed my experience with the series. I still have some complaints about stuff that's like actually written down and a part of the plot, but I no longer have those complaints about connecting to Binti. The way Robin portrays her anxiety and PTSD was done in a way that I don't think I could have given it justice, and I just really loved her narration of all of the characters we saw, and it really added that extra level that really, it heightened my experience with the series. Number 8 is The Nickel Boys. This is by Colson Whitehead, but narrated by J.D. Jackson. This is a really hard-hitting historical fiction, very heavily based on nonfiction sources. This is the story about an institution for boys that basically almost go to juvie, and it's almost a little worse. White and black men are sent there, but our main character is a black man in the, I believe, 60s, and he is sent there because he's in the definition of the wrong place at the wrong time, and he was about to go take college classes early, and instead he ends up at the Nickel Academy for Boys, which is an abusive place. It's really hard to read. It's not necessarily that it's gory, but it's hard. I really liked that I was able to go between the audio and physical book while consuming this, because there were moments where I did need to like slow down and just consume it at my own pace. but there were also times where I was glad that the audiobook was there to help push me through when I was having a hard time with the content. And I thought the narrator was an amazing voice for these characters. So I would recommend that audiobook or physically reading it. Colson Whitehead's writing is beautiful. Number 7 is The Test by Sylvain Nouvelle. This is narrated by Neil Shaw. I am pretty sure I had a really good experience with because I did the audiobook and didn't physically read it. The narrator was so good. This is like a 2-hour long audiobook. It felt like a really intense episode of a TV show that I was just listening to. The premise of the test, I don't want to go into too much because it's so short and a lot of it is you figuring out what's happening, but there is a citizenship test that our main character is taking, and we go from there. It's very Black Mirror. I will say that if you are looking for a deep discussion, that's not what this is. It's much more of a ride than it is a thematic discussion of the events, although it is trying to touch on things. But definitely, as talking to other friends in the community, they don't all feel like the thematic parts were done with enough nuance. And I can respect that. It was definitely, though, with this narrator, a fun, crazy, stressful ride. So I have to have it on this list. Number 6 is Clap When You Land, which has 2 narrators, the author Elizabeth Acevedo and Melania Luisa Marte. Whew, this, again, another story that I cannot imagine my experience being better physically reading it, because this is a story of 2 sisters who didn't know they were sisters and find out after their father passes away in an airplane accident. And each narrator is one of the sisters, which is really great because you never feel confused about who's talking when. And it's in verse, so when something's in verse, to hear the actual phrasing that is intended, I think is really helpful. For me, when I physically read things in verse, I think I rush it too fast. So to have that intentional phrasing and to just hear it as it was intended to be said was really good. And I just think that my experience could not have been better physically reading it. So if you are interested in a story of 2 sisters who didn't know they knew each other, and it's definitely kind of discusses things about like the diaspora, it was really good. At being part of like the Venezuelan diaspora, I can't relate to the Dominican Republic experience, which is what we are focusing in on this book, but it for sure did resonate with me in many ways. But I think based off what a lot of my friends have experienced, that idea of loss and how to handle a loss of someone you love that you are also mad at is, I think, a really touching theme in the story. So just all around a really great read. Number 5 is the nonfiction Radium Girls, narrated by Angela Brazil. Whew. I both loved reading this book and hated reading this book because I was so angry. This is the story about how a bunch of women who used to paint clocks with radium paint so it glowed in the dark got radium poisoning, and how everyone was just denying it was happening, and like, it was very stressful, you know, because it's like, you're just watching a train crash and you can't stop it, and you're angry because capitalism, and yeah. I definitely really enjoyed listening to it, because listening to nonfiction I feel like is easier for me because I typically consume podcasts, which are typically for me nonfiction material. So that was really good, and it was for sure a quality read for me. Number 4 is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, and this was narrated by Christopher Myers, and I loved this story. I have a review for it. It's amazing. I can't imagine another person bringing redemption and jam and pet to life for me. This is a story about the island of Lucille, and on this island there are no more monsters. Monsters being societal problems like domestic abuse, and I don't know, just imagine our world, all the issues we have, they're all gone. That's the type of utopia we're in. And it's about the story of this teenager, Jam, who discovers by summoning Pet by accident that there are still monsters in the community and they have to go on this monster hunt. And I'm saying it like that, and it's not as middle grade as you think. It's definitely young adult. But, you know, they don't know what this monster is because they haven't had it in society for so long. And it was really great. I loved listening to it as an audiobook because there's a lot of dialect and phrasings and words that I probably wouldn't have pronounced correctly, but having the audiobook, I'm now, when I'm reading other things that have like French or Caribbean influence, I'm like, oh, I know that means, like, there's a word doo-doo, which is not spelled the way I thought it was spelled, to say the least. So I think it really helped with those moments of dialect, and Also, Christopher Myers just did a great job. It was awesome. Highly recommend reading Pet, audiobook or otherwise. It was great. Number 3 is The Dutch House, and this was narrated by Tom Hanks. If you had asked me at the beginning of the year, I wouldn't have known I was reading this book and that I would have liked it so much. What is this story really about? It's a story about Danny and Maeve, who are 2 siblings who grew up in this really big fancy house and had a stepmother move in and then were kind of kicked out of the house. And it's historical. It's in like the 70s and 80s, I think, but it's not like super far in the past. And it's just about their relationship. It's a very non-linear story, which I thought would be really jarring, but Tom Hanks, he saved me. He did it well. I think what's also interesting is you would have a very different experience reading this physically than listening, because I think the likability of Danny, our narrator, the main character of the story, I think changes dramatically if it's Tom Hanks' voice or whatever voice you give him. Because he's definitely a privileged boy who's having issues, but like his life's not that hard, if that makes sense. Like it's thematically it's a very weird story, but I had like a really good time consuming it, and that's why it had to make it this high on the list. Like I don't normally make time to listen to audiobooks, and I made time to listen to this one. Number 2 is the entire Thedavabad trilogy. This was narrated by Sunila Nanaki. I'm really sorry if I butchered that. I've stumbled across that name a million times now, but she did an amazing job, so I really do apologize. This is a trilogy that I started physically reading last year. So I did physically read City of Brass and Kingdom of Copper, and then Empire of Gold was coming out, and I was overwhelmed by all the books I had, and I really wanted to get to it. And so I had heard good things about the audiobook, and I wanted to reread it, so I'm like, well, why don't I just reread the first 2 via audiobook? That worked well with me for the First Law. It was so good that I didn't even physically read Empire of Gold. I just got the audiobook for Empire of Gold, and I've never done that, where I was like preferring the audio to physically reading. That doesn't happen for me very often because I do like physically reading a lot. It's just something I like to do. I really enjoyed how she brought all the characters to life. It was so fun. I could not imagine someone else getting me through that story. And for those who don't know, the Thedavabad trilogy is a Middle Eastern adult fantasy story about Nari, Dara, and Ali, and basically kind of maneuvering the politics of the city of Thedavabad. Nari is from the human world, Dara is from the far-off past, and Ali is part of current royalty. And so there's a lot of political strife between people with human blood and jinn blood and pure blood, so that's very there and it's very complicated. There's a lot of learning about the past and what's happened back then, what corruption still exists now, just awesome magic. And more importantly, their character relationships and dynamics are phenomenal. I love them. A lot of people don't like the romance in the series. I don't think it's the center stage. I don't think it's that important. It's definitely more about interpersonal relationships, like the development of friendship and trust, than it is about romantic relationships, in my opinion and experience. I guess that's just something to know, but if you love character-driven fantasy with good politics, like I'm not always a political person and I was obsessed, and I'm so excited to see what they do with this with like a TV show in the future. Number 1 is the Carl duology, which I have a review for that duology, and specifically the narrator I'll talk about is Kristen C, because she is the narrator for the first book, an absolutely remarkable thing. There's a full cast for the second one, but the first one's my favorite, and she's the one who got me into it, and it just consumed my life. This is the story about April May, who one day discovers a statue and wakes her friend up at 3 in the morning and is like, hey, we need to film in front of this statue. Because. And they do, they put it online, they don't think anything of it, and then they're viral come the morning because that statue is all over the world. And she called them Carls, which is why this is the Carls duology. The first book is mainly about April May's change with social media and fame, and book 2 is more about the technological fallout of what happens in book 1. I really think they are amazing audiobooks because they are books, like the book being written, an absolutely remarkable thing, is written by April May to us, so to hear her voice telling the story I thought was really good. And then similarly in the second book, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, you have the full cast because some of our side characters get their own perspectives, which is another important thing to note, because if you don't like the first book because it's only April, May, that is not the case for the second book. But that's important to know if you did really love that it was April, May, it's definitely just not April, May in the second book. So these were my top 10 audiobooks of the year. If you have favorite audiobook narrators, please let me know. I do know the people who do the Stormlight Archives, and I am also looking into the Wheel of Time series for sure. That is something that's happening for me this year. But otherwise, if you just want me to know you're here, leave like a musical note emoji, or you can just say hi. Otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.